We got arrested before we even got off our bikes, and then I was remanded in custody for a month. To be fair, I think the chances of cutting through the fence at Heathrow in the middle of morning rush hour are slim, but especially when the police are expecting you and security are expecting you. So I think even in my wildest dreams, the best we were going to do was start making a hole in the fence. Maybe we would have got through to the other side before security and all the police caught up with us. But the idea was to avoid going anywhere near a runway, and probably just to be inside the base, inside the airport, so that they'd have to suspend flights for however long it took them to clear us off. So I guess in our wildest dreams, we'd get as far as one of the taxiways maybe before they caught us. So when we were planning our airport action, safety was our main concern, safety and making sure that we weren't going to put anybody in danger, not ourselves, not members of the public, not members of staff at the airport, not the police or anybody else in danger. So that was our main priority, and then obviously trying to get publicity and to highlight the complete lack of taking the situation seriously. Coming up to doing this action, I realised I realised it was a bit of a suicide mission and how serious it was going to be. And partly when Roger Hallam and Lou Lancaster and the other 3 defendants in the Whole Truth 5 campaign, when they got such long sentences, I knew it was quite likely that any action we took was likely to be stamped on quite hard. So, but it also made me more committed to have to do it, really. So, because I do believe that that people stepping up and making those kinds of sacrifices is a catalyst for change. I knew it was an international campaign, but obviously all I knew about was what we were planning to do. But there were actions in about, I don't know how many different countries, but quite a few different countries. In other countries, people got on the runway and everything, and yet we were the only people who didn't actually do anything other than go for a nice cycle, and we were remanded in custody, and quite a few other countries didn't even charge the protesters. So it goes to show where the UK is currently at with its policing of peaceful, non-violent protest. We were charged with one thing, and then at our first bail hearing, they said they wanted to, just after a month of being in prison, they said they were changing the charge to a more serious one. So now I'm on some quite strict bail conditions, waiting for trial in January. I was lucky enough to share a cell with one of my co-defendants and to be on the same wing as the other co-defendants. The others are all guys, so there's three women. Well, there's 4 women in the 10 in the 10 of us who've been charged. There's 4 women, one of whom got bail. So initially they remanded 8 of us in custody out of the 10. And then, so the 3 women all got sent to Bronzefield. We all ended up on the same wing, which was great. So, and I was really lucky to be sharing a cell with one of my co-defendants, who now I'm not allowed to talk to, which is a bit mad. It is amazing how much resource they're putting into it all. you know, when you look at what's happening in the world and the level of violence and the way people just think, just trying to find words really to say what I'm thinking. Yeah, like I've been in prison before. I was in prison in the 80s, and 2 very short sentences, and I was in prison during the COVID thing for another short sentence back in, I think, 2021. So my experience of prison then was a lot better than the prison I was in the 80s. So I know some of the people I know recently who've been to prison, like, and now is their first experience of prison, like, think it's terrible. And you know, like, the vegan food is like, you know, is awful. But like, I remember being vegetarian back in the 80s, and like, you just get the vegetables without the meat, and that was your diet. And then, like, if you were vegan, then you'd be living on water, I tell you, dry bread and water, because like, the tea came with milk and sugar already in it. So it's like things are a lot better now. And you know, the whole system. One thing that hasn't changed from the 80s is that the whole system is just designed to frustrate you. It's like they have all these ridiculous rules. And to be fair, when I went in 2021, the rules were quite well explained compared to how they'd been explained in the 80s. What I learned in the 80s when I was there was, don't want anything and then you won't be disappointed. So, you know, the best thing you can do is just to have no expectations and serenely sail through your time. And to be fair, it's the same now. It hasn't really changed. Certainly Bronzefield, it's quite a new prison. It was built to replace Holloway, and it is a lot, you know, nicer environment than Holloway, and it's a fairly new prison, so most things still work, and you know, it's not rat infested or cockroach infested. It's not damp, so that makes it a lot better than some places, you know. Some of my co-defendants were in Wandsworth for a while, and that is really terrible. So one of the things that stands out for me is like so many women are in prison who just, like, why? Bronzefield is like for short sentences and for women on remand, and maybe for some women who are coming to the end of long sentences, because you can do weekend leave from there, I think. So there's some amazing people in there, you know. I've met some amazing people. I'm not going to say any names, but you know, there are some women in there, and you just think, wow, you know, up to a point, our lives are such an accident of birth. So there was one young woman there who's a really, really deeply thoughtful and creative woman, and she was born in fucking Holloway. Do you know what I mean? I think she's probably been out of prison quite a lot, and she's such a beautiful person. And one of the things I really liked about being in prison was how people look after each other. Yeah, and there's so many people in there just for random things. There was quite a few women. It seemed to be a thing where, like, a new mode of drug smuggling, where women had gone on holiday with a bloke, and then they'd come back and they'd put their whole baggage had been weighed in, and then somebody put drugs in it after it had gone through the check-in at the airport, and then they were on remand because they got found with drugs. They were such, like, straight women, do you know what I mean? They were so, like, just like random people who had, like, you know, jobs and cars and houses and fucking things like that, and then there they were, like, on remand for 6 months waiting trial. Maybe they'd been suckered by some guy or whatever. One of my protester colleague, she was on early release and she was supposed to be getting a tag, and then because they've got no tags because they released so many people, there's a shortage of tags, so she never got tagged, and then she got recalled to prison because she didn't have a tag. And then she was supposed to be being released, but because the probation service is short-staffed, she had to do another month because they couldn't have a probation officer for her. And like, honestly, half the people in prison must be there because of that kind of like ridiculousness. Or people would have like bail conditions, not to go to a certain place, and then they'd be told they were given accommodation somewhere else and the accommodation wouldn't be there, and they'd be released at 7 o'clock at night and they couldn't get there anyway, and so they'd end up getting rearrested because they weren't obeying their curfew. Or, do you know what I mean? It's just absolutely full of like ridiculous catch-22 things like that. It's like my bail conditions. So my bail conditions say I've got to live at home, but they also say I've got to go to court. But to get to court, I have to travel to London and then stay over because I couldn't get to London in time to get to court, and then I'd have to stay over another night to be able to get home again. But to stay in London for 2 nights is breaking my bail conditions because I have to stay at home, and yet not to go to court is breaking my bail conditions. So it's like the prison, you'd think, oh well, they'd understand, you know, if something like that happened, they'd adjust your bail accordingly, but they don't. They just send people back to prison. It was mad. It's like any community, you know, there's people who get on and people who don't get on, and there's you know, I do like the way people look out for each other, and when people are having a hard time, some people are more sympathetic than others, but then like if you're having a hard time and somebody else is like kicking off, it makes it more difficult to be sympathetic to them. But it is like, my experience of it is that it is quite a supportive community, you know, and some of the screws are bastards and a lot of them are just there trying to do their job, and then there's a few of them who really put themselves out to try and help people, you know, and probably some of them have been doing it for a while, and yeah, fair play to the ones who can stay human. And I know some of the like kind of the worse the prisons are, the more of a problem they have with staffing. I would say, having been in Bronzefield like 3 years ago compared to now, you can see that it's creaking, because like ridiculous things were happening. Like one of my co-defendants, her property was given to somebody else who had the same surname, and then she got told she should look out for it round the prison. I mean, it's like it took us like 5 days to get a phone call. Like, you're supposed to get a phone call when you arrive at prison. You're supposed to get a phone call to be able to let somebody know where you are. And it took us 5 days to get a call and 5 days to get our property through. You know, I think prison and hospital are quite similar. You know, the difference being that if you're in hospital, you're ill, so it's a lot harder if you're ill. Although a lot of women in prison are also ill and will probably be better off in hospital if hospitals weren't so under pressure and also underfunded and understaffed. So, yeah, it's just like anywhere, isn't it? You just have to make the best of where you are and what you've got. There was a whole bunch of women from Palestine Action who came in as well before I left, who were still there on remand. It's quite interesting because the women from Palestine Action were admitted. I think they were brought in on terrorism charges, so they were all put on separate wings. So they'd been told not to tell anybody for their own protection where they were from, but that was bollocks because so there's a lot of black women in prison. There's a massively disproportionate number of black women in prison, and racists aren't really tolerated. So I would imagine anyone who does come in from the right wing will not be encouraged to spout their filth on the wing. There's a lot of class stuff, I think, around prison. So I was talking to Lou about some stuff. She saw bullying going on, and she saw favouritism going on, but I looked at it kind of with a different perspective, and what I saw was women who didn't have anything being looked after by other women who had some access to things like food and what have you. So it was all right for us because we were on remand, and B, we had people on the outside who could pay money into our account. So once we've been there for a couple of weeks, you can start buying things on Canteen, and if you're on remand, you get quite a lot of money to spend on Canteen. So it's possible to get stuff and give it to other people. So like my cellmate, my cellmate is a classic example of the system fucking it up for you. My cellmate was listed as convicted, not remand, so she only got £20 to spend, whereas I got £60 to spend. So some people aren't even going to have 20 quid to spend because they haven't got people on the outside who can give them money. And if you're not in for a long time, or there's a lot of because Bronzefield's near Heathrow, there was like quite a lot of foreign women who didn't even speak English, or who had really like poor English, because I did some translating from Spanish for some Chilean women, and some, I think they were Colombian, the other two. So people who haven't got anything, then like the women who do the savoury, who give out, so the prisoners who like prisoners work in the kitchens, prisoners who work in the savoury where you get your meals, and so they might not give people who've got loads of stuff a biscuit, because that's what Lou was saying, is only the favourites get the biscuits, and only the favourites get like big dinners, and so whatever you order, you won't necessarily get what you order, and the people at the back of the queue sometimes end up with nothing. But what I saw was women who didn't have very much getting given some extras. Do you know what I mean? And those extras have got to come from somewhere, because only so much stuff comes out of the kitchen. So it might not be a perfect system, but it is kind of a way of robbing from the rich to give to the poor, if you like. So my thing was, it's not as straightforward as bullying or being in with the in crowd, but it's about people negotiating the system, if you like, and trying to look after each other.